This mini ITX gaming PC was super fun to make, and the final result was something I'm tremendously proud of. So let's get into it. The motherboard we're using is the Gigabyte A520i AC, a great and reliable option for a more capable build. I got it brand new off Amazon for $119.99, which is insane value. It's got a great build quality, Wi-Fi, as well as an NVMe slot which similar priced motherboards didn't have. For the CPU, we're using the Ryzen 5 5600, which is currently the champion of mid-range CPUs. I got it off AliExpress for a remarkably low $76, and I recommend anyone else to do the same. As long as you buy from a well-rated seller, you're getting a brand new and authentic CPU for a major discount. Unbeatable value, even across used marketplaces. The SSD we're using is the cheapest 1TB NVMe I could find. It's the Silicon Power P34A60, which has a read speed of 220 megabits per second and a write speed of 1600 megabits per second. I got it off Amazon for $53, but it currently sells for about $55. So at that point, I would get a Crucial P3 Gen 4 NVMe, which is a much better alternative based on reputation and read and write speeds. I opted to package the SSD in a nice heatsink, although it's usually not necessary. This is the MHQ JRH, which I got for $10, and it will help keep the SSD cool in the event of any major data transfers. For the RAM, we're using 16 gigabytes of Kingston HyperX Redditor. It's got a max clock speed of 3200 megahertz and some really nice RGB as well. I got this used off Facebook Marketplace for $35, which is a very standard price for RAM. The cooler we're using is the Wraith Prism, which I got off Facebook Marketplace for about $15. It's considerably better than the Wraith Stealth, which is the stock cooler that comes with the 5600, so as far as thermals are concerned, we're looking really good. The case we're using is the Cooler Master NR200P V2. I snagged it off Facebook Marketplace for just $20 from a guy selling an RTV'd pallet of them, which again is insane value since it usually goes for about $80 new. The PSU we're using is something truly special for this build. It's the Corsair SF600, and just like the last few parts, I bought an open box off Facebook Marketplace for an astounding $60. This thing is absolutely amazing and quiet. It's rated Tier A on the PSU tier list and generally goes for about $150 to $170 new, making it an incredible cop. Here it is next to an ATX PSU, and the size difference is just insane. This thing is absolutely tiny. The PSU comes with 3 PCIe or CPU ports, which makes it perfect for GPUs that require 2 connectors, as many of the more powerful models do, such as the RTX 3070, which is what we're using for this build. Now, obviously a Tier A PSU for $60 is not repeatable, so I ventured out and found one that is as close as I could get it. It's the Channelwell 750W SFX PSU. It isn't as thoroughly rated as the other PSU models. It's not even on the PSU tier list, but it looks to have some decent Amazon reviews, even compared to the actual e-waste like the Amdias or Apivia SFX PSUs. Moving on to our build, we plug in the PSU with the connectors and set it inside the case. It hangs off the back wall and uses an internal power cable extension to connect the PSU to a wall plug. Once that was done, we were ready to add the motherboard, which by the way is so tiny it only took 4 mounting screws. So I went ahead and screwed it down and plugged up all the power connectors. At this point, I was hit with my first point of difficulty, which was the 24-pin motherboard connector. This segment is so hard to cable manage. It's so stiff and short, and it would block the bottom fans from spinning and would even press up against the hot top panel of the GPU, which is really sketchy. PSU connectors, I'm sure, are thermal resistant to some extent, but a 240-watt GPU is going to have a burning hot surface under full load, so keeping them far apart is ideal. If you're considering the NR200P V2 for your ITX build, I would highly recommend getting some short but flexible cable extensions. It will make the building process much easier, saving you the headache I had to endure. Most ITX builds have vertically mounted slots, so a PCIe riser cable was necessary to set the graphics card. As you can see from the footage, the Wraith Prism is clearly too tall to fit the GPU, so I had to find another CPU cooler. I removed the cooler and replaced it with an AIO that I had previously bought used for $35. It's the Corsair H100i V2 with a 260-watt TDP. This AIO is amazing, and you can get it used for anywhere between $20 and $50. Although it's a nice cooler, this is when the whole building process really started to get difficult. If you're ever doing an ITX build, make sure you buy a compatible air cooler. They're not that expensive and perform really well, even on AM5, and take no effort to install. But if you choose to use an AIO, be prepared for pain. Replacing the mount on the AIO took so much strength I was sweating bullets, and getting it into the build was a nightmare. It barely fit with just the sheer size of the radiator and the fans, and to make matters worse, the cables were so bulky and inflexible it took all my strength and patience to force it into place as I screwed the cooling block down. ITX builds are so short on working space, I could barely get this part done. I kept dropping the screws and was even scared to death the AIO cables would break and start leaking everywhere. The finishing blow to my spirit was that after all that, the GPU still didn't fit, so I started to think this build was chopped. After staring at the build for a few minutes, I decided I was too stubborn to give up on this increasingly sketchy build. So what I did to save the build was I repositioned the AIO mounting bracket about 90 degrees so I could fit the cooling block with both cables oriented towards the top. Getting the block down normally was hard, so you can imagine how difficult this part was. I was literally shaking my entire desk to fit this thing on. I even brought out my power drill, so you know things were getting a little out of hand. Here's the final result of my genius on-the-spot improvising. This is the before and this is the after. And as you can see, we can finally fit the GPU into the expansion cable, so we were clear to finish up our build. The GPU we're using, by the way, is the EVGA XC3 RTX 3070, which I bought pre-owned for $270. Not the best value, but very decent nonetheless. After some very tedious cable management to place the PSU cables away from the burning hot top surface of the GPU, we can finally put an end to this crazy and sketchy build. It doesn't look too bad from the video, but when you're playing with hundreds of dollars worth of electrical components, the smallest errors feel like disasters. The PC powered on nicely with thankfully zero software issues. It booted right up into the BIOS and recognized our boot drive, so it was time to install Windows. I downloaded Windows onto a USB from my main rig and plugged it straight into the ITX build while it was off. After powering on the PC, the Windows 11 installer automatically worked its magic and we were set to complete the install. You can see me here playing with the build while the install took place. The components were in so tight I could barely get the glass panel on without it popping right off. Now, if you were to buy these exact components or their equivalents brand new at MSRP, the build would cost you nearly $1,600. But by buying secondhand parts and taking advantage of certain deals, we were able to trim $900 off for a total of $700. And you can definitely expect to achieve this build or something very similar for around the same price. Once loaded into Windows, the Gigabyte App Center popped up and downloaded and installed all the necessary motherboard drivers for us, which was super cool because I'm used to doing all that myself. After the rounds of Windows updates, our PC was finally ready for some benchmarks, and I gotta say, I did not expect this PC to perform as well as it did. I came in thinking it was going to be a top tier 1080p PC, but it actually crushed benchmarks in 1440p. Starting off with the 3D Mark Steel Nomad benchmarking tool, our GPU demonstrates a really solid total score of 3204, where the average is 3171 taken from over 2500 RTX 3070s. This is always a great feeling, and it's to be expected from EVGA. Their models of GPUs are generally better than the other manufacturers. It's a crying shame they no longer produce GPUs because I'm a big fan of their stuff. We then ran the CPU benchmark where we got some really solid numbers per thread recruitment. Granted, these were slightly below average compared to other Ryzen 5 5600s, but even still, we now know that the GPU and CPU perform well under various loads with excellent temperatures, which was a major concern of mine in this compact build. I forgot to mention this before, but I was actually able to manage a really great airflow solution to this build. I stuck two beefy 140mm fans on the bottom platform of the case and aimed them to blow air up, where the AIO fans were also aimed upwards, creating an optimal airflow design. Up next, we have Cyberpunk 2077, where I ran the game at 1440p, and I was amazed at how the 3070 held up in terms of performance, temps, and especially wattage. You don't normally consider the 3070 a 1440p card, but we got about 40 to 50 FPS on Ray Tracing Ultra and 70 and 80 FPS on regular Ultra, which is insane. The 3070 is sorely underrated. The CPU was of course getting good thermals since the H100i V2 is total overkill for the 5600. We then ran Fortnite at 1440p at low settings, as well as performance mode, which is much more demanding on the CPU, and I got about 170 to 220 FPS, which is really good considering that the CPU is more mid-range. Up next, we had to test the Blacksmith Wukong benchmark tool, where I ran medium settings with ray tracing low and got an average FPS of about 62 with a low of 45. I ran the benchmark again without ray tracing and got over 100 FPS on average with a low of 65, which is crazy good in terms of frame drops. This proves that the PC can run some very demanding titles at medium settings over 100 FPS, making it a great option in 2025. All in all, I'm really impressed with this build. I wasn't expecting it to play these demanding titles with such a good frame rate with the resolution and settings we ran. The sheer size of the build is super fun and convenient for portability, which was my main goal of choosing an ITX build. You can carry the PC under one arm and it can fit anywhere in a car or even on the carry-on on a plane. Here it is next to my full ATX tower and my extended ATX tower, both of which dwarf the mini ITX build. Overall, I'm happy to end with the beginning of yet another capable build. I'm hoping this pseudo guide brought some valuable insight. If you plan on making an ITX build, make sure you 1. Use a compatible cooler, and 2. Consider flexible cable extensions for the PSU. I think those 2 tips will take you a long way, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.